And everyone said, "Oh, that's brilliant." Then I walked out of the room and I sat down, and there was a bloke on the phone sitting next to me saying, "Yeah, I'm trying to hire 10 automated testers who I'm going to manually create these automated tests." So they weren't listening to that presentation. They all said it was great, but there was this idea that it's all about people. We just need more bodies to solve this problem. So that's not going to work because you haven't got any, because they're all dying and they're all too old and no one wants to live COBOL, and it just does not scale. But I mean, it does seem to be a perennial problem that people seem to want to just hire people.
The Why Didn't You Test That podcast experiences an insight on the many sides of better software delivery.
So today we have Marcel Mersie, a good friend of mine again. Known each other for many, many years. Solved world peace, sitting around in various coffee shops and in Utrecht usually is our normal place that we hang out. So Marcel has been kind of in the front line and in the Netherlands to solve some of the more complex problems that I've seen. All of the projects we've worked on have always been very interesting and for the most part very successful. You're a kind of technical lead in testing. You're currently working for the executive.
I'm executive advisor actually.
Advisor, that was the word I was looking for.
Yeah.
For the Dutch tax administration.
Customs also. So
quite a big role. Okay, so let's just be whimsical a little bit. So I've worked in Holland. Quite a lot. So they called me Mr. Yellow over there. I must admit, I did like going to some of the companies where they do all these psychometric testing or whatever they called it, and I was just Mr. Yellow, which apparently means I was very creative. But when they put their teams together, they try and have an interesting blend of personality types. You do need your kind of detailed people, and you need a bit of visionaries and all the rest of that. I always thought that was kind of cool and a good way of being able to do it. We sort of talked about it a little bit with Paul Jarrett a little while ago, if you don't remember, Rich, about having a good blend of people within the team and all that kind of stuff. So is that still a thing in the Netherlands then, Marcel?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Do you have a color, Marcel?
I'm not. I'm so a little bit yellow because I'm very creative. So that's why we did a lot of things together, I think.
So, I mean, we were chatting a little bit before, and I suppose the thing that's kind of we're starting to do a little bit work together again, which is kind of why we've re-engaged. But some of the work we're doing in modeling at the moment is I guess now is very much focused on trying to get a common understanding, and diagrams are a good way of doing that. Language is pretty tricky and it's pretty dense and easy to misinterpret. I guess that's what a lot of AI is trying to do at the moment, is pay off the technical debt of bad language and making some reasonable guesses. So we're actually having some quite a lot of success with quite a lot of customers now in terms of being able to get people to build those better requirements and to get a common understanding and do all that stuff about actually shifting left, and and then also build the test cases so you can test it right at the beginning. But the thing you were talking about was actually a kind of interesting variation on this, which was kind of the knowledge leak. So can you just expand a little bit about what you mean by that?
The good thing is that we're having about 5,000 people, IT staff. A lot of them are working there for a quite long period because people like to work here. The bad thing is that in the next couple of years, a lot of those people, as me, a little bit gray, going on retirement. So if we don't do anything at all, we've got a huge problem that our knowledge is leaking away. So what we're now doing the next couple of, I think, max 10 years, we need to have something what helps us get the knowledge out of those gray heads into a system or whatever. So that's what I meant with the knowledge leak. I think if we do nothing, we got a huge problem.
So is there actually, Rich? Yeah, why don't you pick up on this a little bit? Because I mean, the interesting thing is like there's the general process flows, but then there's the sort of the detail as you get down into the weeds.
So interestingly, we had a similar thing, and knowledge entropy was kind of what we called it in terms of entropy seems to be coming back in a few kind of buzzwordy things that I see in the industry now. But we had knowledge entropy, right? And so complex systems, they all combine with each other. head knowledge in and of itself, you've only got so much cognitive load in your head, right? And so even if even if you think you're an SME and everybody else thinks you're an SME in the system, there's probably gaps in your understanding and gaps how you apply that knowledge to the actual reality of how the system works, right? And that's almost now. And unless you exercise those things over and over again, which you never do, that kind of drains away, right? And so your 30-year-old SME that, like Marcel said, is going to retire anytime soon, they already don't have a good understanding, right? And so when they go, that's going to go entirely, right? And so we had that dynamic. We had also a lot of kind of outsourcing. And so, lots of handovers from either permies or different outsourcers to different outsourcers. And so our knowledge entropy around how our systems worked and how they all combined together kept draining, right? And so we needed a constant mechanism to, I'll call it codify, essentially creating these models that we put into the living, breathing change process, because unless it's in the change process, it won't happen, to make sure that we had our best chance of trying to stop that entropy, that leak happening within our organization, understanding that it was going to happen regardless of how good we did. And so we needed to make sure, and this is back to the whole shift left, the three amigos conversation, you have that conversation up front to say, get a model out. Do we really understand the system? Do we really understand this interface? And if we don't, then we know very early doors that we have to do something to face into it, right? And ideally, that's a small gap, and therefore we can feed that with talking to different people around and, understanding how the system actually works, reverse engineering those things. To Marcel's point around actually that person's not there anymore and we haven't touched the system in the last 6 years. Oh dear. We need to be a bit more strategic about how we fill this gap. And there's another part of that. We need to let the material risk takers know the risks they're taking today and how we plan to address those risks. Modeling for us became a very important way, we call it living, breathing specifications, how to fill that gap and also make the risk more transparent, right? Because, we were never going to fill these things in its entirety, and it's stupid to think that, something could be documented in its entirety. Actually, let's make it far more understood what we do know and the risks that we don't. That's kind of my very similar experience to kind of the experience of Marcel.
So, Marcel, do you think it's kind of measurable in terms of the amount of knowledge gap there is? Is that a way to persuade management that this is something they need to take seriously? The ability to measure that, as opposed to saying, people are leaving.
Yeah, what we're doing now is we're measuring HR department is providing us a watch. Then the people are going away, and what we're also doing, we have working with the databases, with repositories, and there we store our applications, what state of life they are. So yes, we're making really those state truths, looking how the people, for example, our system. Where everyone get their paying is now 42 years old, written in COBOL, on a DB system.
I am available for consulting in COBOL, by the way.
So, Microsoft tried it, Oracle tried it.
Yeah.
No one can rewrite it because of the performance issues they got. So I can tell you. It's massive. Yes, we are trying to do, but the other thing we got is we're saying to our government, they're saying, okay, we should renewal, so we have new people, new processes. For example, he says you get 100 man years a year for the couple of 3 years, and then it should something systems out. So it will remain on, and every year it takes a more longer time. So it's not only our company or our the tax office itself, but more of all our complete the government, the ministers are saying we should do that. So that's the most problem I think we got. So we should. It's a thing. What we can do is how we can at least take damage and how we think about it, how we can deal with it. So that's why I'm looking around, looking like those models and how we can deal with it, something like that. So it is a serious problem, I think.
Yeah, from my point of view, it's interesting, right? Because the risk sits at a very high level, right? Doesn't it?
Yeah,
in terms of
exactly.
CIO,
yeah.
CTO, they know,
Higher.
and
yeah.
they know that these guys are getting on a bit, and they are the SMEs in the core systems of the organization, right? You mentioned, most financial services, it's a mainframe written in COBOL, right? That was 45 years old. The interesting thing, and a lot of the mechanisms for trying to then hand that knowledge over is purely a people thing. In terms of we'll get a group of people to do an intensive knowledge transfer from that SME, right? And they'll spend months, if not years, trying to do that handover. And the problem you've got is that SME only remembers things as they get and do certain changes, and therefore that part is incomplete. Also, the lifespan of a person within an organization now is not 30 years, right? You're not going to get a 30-year SME anymore. And so it also doesn't take into consideration that person you're training up probably is only going to be there for 18 months, 2 years, maybe 3 years at best, right? And do they really want to learn COBOL?
So, yes, they do. It's a fantastic little answer.
I'm not saying they don't. I'm just putting out there as a question.
Yeah. I mean, to be honest, the reason there's so much around is that we managed to develop absolutely so many systems very quickly with it. And it is pretty pseudo-conversational in terms of how you do that. But, I mean, the reality is a better way to think about this is to, if you think about data, okay, so the data is really the truth. That's really the truth. That's really the reality of all you really give a shit about. You don't really care about what the screens look like and everything like that. So if you want to deal with this problem, what you need to do is you need to be able to know what data is being created for each transaction type or each activity. So you can go off and you can do modeling at a much higher level and basically explain, sit down, all of you, and just gradually draw up a set of high-level models which explain the process of a tax refund, of a death in service, and you just run through all of the most common, pick off the top sort of 9 out of 10 things that people understand. There are much more obscure things like fraudulent events and things like that, which you might want to deal with later. You pick those out and you model those up from a fairly high level. Then what you need to be able to do is you need to be able to run those through the system individually. Think of them as a use case or even a test case or an automated case or whatever you want, and you give it a number, you give it an ID or something like that. You track that ID all the way through. And at the end of that, you actually have a set of data that has been created. Ideally, you should also be able to look up which data has been referenced. So if we're reading data, where's that data coming from? If we're populating that data from somewhere, it's coming from a reference system or something like that. That then gives you basically a picture, which is the reality of what's going on in your system. And it's sort of trying to turn a black box into a little bit of a white box. So you don't particularly care what the COBOL code is doing, but you know exactly what's happening when this is processing. Then you sit through and you go through each one of those use cases with people and you say, this is what's happening. And I mean, I've done this so many times. You sit there and people say, oh, I never knew that. Oh, you mean it posts to the GL system? How does it post to the GL system? Oh, it creates a horrible text message, which is then which was written in 1992, which then goes across to the Supra system where we do something and then we push it onto somewhere else. You go, okay, fine. Well, we can break that off into a separate piece of information, but the reality is that's what it's doing. So in effect, what you're trying to do then is by isolating all of the use cases for your top 9. There will be massive numbers of variations, which then you get into the world of coverage, but you're generally paying off that technical debt, and you're not having to worry too much with people apart from the initial discussion. And you can almost do that from the user manual, because there is a user manual and there's a training guide, and people will sit there and they know how to use the system. But what they don't know is what's going on as the data flows through the system. It's very similar to migrations. If you want to migrate, most migrations fail because people don't spend the time understanding the data that flows. They just worry about your nice blue cup and what it's going to look like, and it's going to have 4 handles on it, and it's going to be able to levitate, and all the things that are completely unrealistic. That's what they want. They always want a magic green button. So, so I think this idea of being able to spending that time, which is a technical thing. It's nothing that, and you don't need system experts to be able to do this. You just need to sit with the users and say, right, explain what's going on. Let's run it. We're going to use a VSAM diff mechanism. We're going to diff it. We're going to tell you exactly what we're going to do, produce a whole series of reports for you, and then we're going to go and have more meetings to pay that technical debt off. And then we're going to go back and refine the models Because in those models, we're now moving from the high level now down into the more details, and we're saying this is exactly what's happening. So there's a switch in here which is turning that into a reversal, or it's creating an accrual record, or it's pushing out an MQ message to the payment system or to the payroll system or whatever it is. And it's really that sort of almost coloring it all in, I think really is the only way. And this is just so crazy common. And people don't seem to have a systematic approach to being able to do this. It's always talking to people.
Yeah.
When do we start? Let's do it.
Yeah.
Seriously, I mean, it's a technical problem. Let's just. I mean, you could start with modeling and just go and talk to people at the high levels and just get them to get an agreement. That'll be a battle in itself, because people, especially with different teams, they all have a different understanding of how the systems work. Because they're always looking at it from this angle, and they're looking at it from this angle, and then someone's they're just seeing the business intelligence reports coming through, and you're like, well, hang on. Where's that information come from? Well, that's actually come from over. I didn't know that.
Oh, yeah. So what's not helping here, what you're saying is we have about 250 Scrum teams, and there are very autonomic, all of them. So working together. Sometimes what we did is before we were very high structured, and then they came agile, and you get a little bit to the other side of the clock. So I think we should be a little bit more in the middle, so we know more about each other anyway. We say where you come the data from. We should more talk to each other, having more some standardization. Of course, you should let the teams free, but a little bit standards about it. It couldn't harm, I should say.
I was gonna say, in terms of based on what you said and what you just said there, right? What you just kind of Conway's law is your IT architecture reflects the kind of the communication systems within your organization, right? And what you just described there is typical, right? In that you've got lots of systems that talk to each other, but they're all maintained by teams that don't talk. And so, or whilst the IT systems do talk to each other, technically, actually the methods to which they communicate isn't particularly well understood because those teams don't talk to each other, right? There is no documented interface specification, for want of a better thing, because there is no communication there. I wonder, Hugh kind of explained that it's simple to start having communication, building those models out, accruing, paying back that technical debt. But I also wonder why is it almost, and these risks go up to a very high level, right? Is it almost on the too hard to fix pile, or our organization doesn't work like that, and therefore it's too hard to change our current way of working?
People are aware of it, but there are several things. It's so big, so huge. And when we're trying to do something, trying a POC, it's okay. And then we're getting of the government. If you said I want a system, then you go to buy something to what you help out, so it gets stuck again. Sometimes it costs you a year to get a new tool, and then those people are gone already. So there are not one factor, there are many factors. And you've got for the tax company, it's not one tax. It's income tax, a car tax, some different taxes. And there are some equal things because people are in Dutch people are in one entity, but there are so many things. And then you got some of them are using the very high modern standard. There are some departments where they even for years already using AI. The others they are still on COBOL and they're still using those. Where we start small, and then we have some people, no one, because we're a government organization, it's hard that if you say, yes, I'm going to do it, and it fails, then it's public money, then your head chopped off. It's not the first time. So there are a lot of people are afraid to make such huge decisions. So it's the technical depth there is. That's very. It's the complexity. It's who's really responsible. Yeah, actually the minister, but he's not going to say it. So there are several things, and then there's the because there are laws, and you said, okay, you should go if you want to buy a new tool. You know it all. It should be transparent for whole of Europe. It costs so long time that the people who are eager with it and enthusiastic with it, they're all gone again. So all those kinds of things make it that it's the good news is, yes, we're busy with it. Yes, we're doing things, but I'm not working for so long for the government. That's why I already what you mentioned. I'm really also the yellow guy. Want to do things. At the first 2 years, you don't know how many times I eat my fingers off because of the zone. But the good news is, yes, we're going there. I'm seeing, I'm gonna hop in, I'm trying it, I'm making them enthusiastic and trying to say, okay, let's do it, come on. And the good way is I'm now even can talk to directly to directors, etc. So I can convince them. So we're doing stuff, but every help we can get, I will get. Okay, come help me with ideas, help me out, etc. So from experience from other companies, because we're not only a large company, I know that, and we're also talking to the Dutch banks, etc. How did you do it? And other international companies, how did you do it? Energy companies, there also used to be government agencies, now not anymore. But how did they do it? All those kind of things, we're looking around so it can help us.
How have those other places overcome that challenge? Is it almost as simple as almost getting that communication going broader than the individual team? Because fundamentally, that's one of the biggest challenges, right? In terms of the overarching influence, getting the overarching funding, because everybody essentially funds their own little bits. Everybody is their own little feature factory. Actually, bringing it up a level to say, actually, if we work as a system, if I use that word, actually we'll all move faster together. But obviously that doesn't happen. I'm interested in terms of the other perspectives you're getting in terms of how they faced into the challenge.
Yeah, but it's also the day-by-day business. We all know there are less people on the market. We can't get people. If you got money, it doesn't help us because we don't got the people. So, and what you see is we have all those 250 teams, and the product owner says, okay, we should deliver the things. And I think, it is not possible, I know. But if we say for a couple of 2 years we had got no law changes, for example, and we all should focus on there, I think it would be such a rising line. But now we're trying to do it, and there's always is a new thing. And we all know product owners most of the time only say, okay, we need the products, we need the new functionality. Not only product owner, but even therefore, because the public expect it also from us. So that's the squeeze.
I mean, you keep talking about there's money, but there's no people, which is true. I mean, quite often when I was I was at a testing conference. I think I bumped into you there. And there was a big presentation. In fact, we just gave a presentation about how we could automatically generate test cases and automation scripts, and we could basically cut the amount of time that you spend testing the system, and you would test it more rigorously, and you would be auto-generating, whatever scripting language you wanted. We didn't really care, and we could, we'd gone from 10 manual test cases to one automated test script to 500 automated test cases in 3 hours. And then, everyone said, oh, that's brilliant. Then I walked out of the room and I sat down, and there was a bloke on the phone sitting next to me saying, yeah, I'm trying to hire 10 automated testers who I'm going to manually create these automated tests. So they weren't listening to that presentation. They all said it was great. But there was this idea that it's all about people. We just need more bodies to solve this problem. So that's not going to work because you haven't got any, because they're all dying and they're all too old and no one wants to live COBOL, and it just does not scale. But I mean, it does seem to be a perennial problem that people seem to want to just hire people. Is that true? Not true?
I think that's true. I know what you're saying, and I got also visual with it. But for a lot of people, it's very scary.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that's also one of the things, especially in the testing area, People are a little bit, look what they got. It works now. Don't change it. And I think we have still in the Netherlands anyway. Yeah, I know. I'm now talking for Dutch people. They're very good in it. I'm saying they're good testers, but they're not changed so rapidly. If they have something good, why change it? So, and that also what you are describing now, with 10 men, it should be sometimes better to have another approach. But I think the people are a little bit scared.
They're very comfortable. I mean, I noticed that when I went to Eurostar a couple of years ago, where I basically challenged the audience to make a change in their behavior. And you know, they all said, "Oh, fantastic presentation," and you know, and they all left the room, and they didn't. They literally just went back to the desk, opened up the spreadsheets, started cutting and pasting stuff, you know, and you just knew that, well, that was a complete and utter waste of time, you know. So at some stage or other, there's got to be someone who's, you know, some kind of visionary. I mean, alternatively, I remember I went to American Express once. And I was just chatting away in a room with just a really nice guy. It was kind of let's call him a sort of senior middle manager. Anyway, I said, you know, there's a few different ways you can do these things, and you know, you go home and watch these videos. Anyway, the guy went home. He spent like the whole evening watching all these videos. He came in, and then I saw an email about a week later where he basically sent out to all his peers and his senior managers saying, "We've got it wrong. We really do need to rethink." And I've looked at these videos, and this is my distilled report. Yeah. And about 3 months later, they changed. So, you know, and it worked. It made a hell of a difference. You know, they started to automatically generate automated tests. They, you know, they were much more dynamic. They cut teams down from 30 to 2, you know, all that kind of stuff. And it literally came from one conversation with one person who just was prepared to stand up and rattle a few sabers, and then there was a reception within the other people within the organization that said, "Oh, let's give it a try. Let's run a couple of pilots with a couple of different project types, and let's give that a go. What did we learn? Okay, fine. Well, you know, there was a bit of resistance because some people never want to change. You know, they did all that kind of stuff, and they did, you know. And then by the end of it, they had someone who was pushing from behind, and then there was also a visionary up front saying, "Look, this does not scale. This is never going to work," and it worked. You know, so it can be done. So it's a matter of trying to find those particular combination of cogs of people that are going to suddenly twist, and you're not turning one cog and turning another one, which is going to fight back against you. You know, Rich, any thoughts on that?
I reflect back on a lot of organisations. I think there's people who are comfortable in how they do things today. Let's carry on doing it. To Marcel's point, do I really want to take the risk and put myself out there if it goes wrong? Oh no. But also, I think a lot of organisations work on resource augmentation, and so almost the behaviour, the culture. Testers work within projects where you'll have a scrum master or a project manager or whatever, who essentially is dealing in people. And so this is where, in order to go faster, I ramp up or turn the dial around how many people I have, rather than looking at actually how do I make that flow more efficient, right? And I think, you know, to a large extent, that stuck in the way of working and also that resource augmentation keeps it where it is, right? There is a certain comfort, if you should say that, around that. If you really scrutinized, did a flow analysis around how efficient that process is today, I don't think that those organizations probably are getting value for money. There's a hell of a lot of fat to cut out in terms of duplication, not just with tests, but, you know, the whole, inevitably, all of those knowledge gaps that exists are mitigated through really, really expensive and inefficient integration testing, probably. And, you know, no automation. It's just in test.
One other thing
really
I would just
way of doing it.
One other thing I would add on that is the ability to work in parallel. You know, you've got how many scrum teams? You said 200 scrum teams, whatever. Generally, they will be waiting for another scrum team to give them something, which is complete madness. So, you know, they're saying, "Oh yeah, we're storming along doing these features, but we can't do any of these features because the API isn't ready, because the other team hasn't done that bit yet." And suddenly you've got this kind of like jiggling along type of thing. Whereas actually, if you isolate, for example, if you build a decent description of an API, which, you can do it in our tool, you can do it in other tools, but within that you also provide a virtual version of that, which is not reliant on the team that's developing it. It's a specification of what they're supposed to do. Once they do that, then you should be able to virtualize it, and then you should be able to put data. Basically this idea of a sort of dynamic sandbox where you can basically spin up data into these virtual endpoints, and those could be mainframe endpoints as well, by the way, because it's just a BSAM file, which is a structure which can be simulated. So all of those things then allow you to say, well, that team is, we don't particularly care what's going on in your system, but we do need these 7 or 8 responses. I need to know that this person is due a tax refund, and the tax refund amount should be this, and it's for this reason. That's all I care about. So there is no reason why you can't put technology inside to a development process which takes away the grit in the machine. Then eventually they come up with the API. You've already done some of the testing in terms of the actual contract itself. What you'll find then is that they've got some, sometimes they're passing a null, sometimes they're passing a leaf instead of an empty tag. There's a bit of that goes on, but that's pretty routine. But in terms of the core capabilities, it's just a matter of plugging it together. So I think using tech in an intelligent way makes, we talk about the inner loop and the outer loop. The inner loop, there's all this stuff around, everyone's, fantastic. But actually, this is where there's the difference between the outer loop and the inner loop, and not being able to get one to drive the other by being able to have that much more efficient. And it basically comes down to your environments, your data, your documentation and understanding of that, which you can build up from the data itself. And then also just having a reasonable number of models, which will give you a much bigger set a better set of coverage rather than trying to guess it or do it by hand. All of that can be built into a technology stack, and there's loads of free stuff out there. And there's also our stuff as well, which would drive a lot of this. But, I think that's pretty seriously missing in terms of the vision that it's not just about the people. It is about that kind of building a coherent technology stack. And you want to be able to plug some things and some things out. I mean, I think at Rabobank, where we had some pretty good success, I think they had an old Power Builder system, which was probably the best I've seen in terms of having a corporate dictionary of data elements, which was maintained. It was pretty old tech, but in terms of the data that was in it, it was very useful. And people from other teams could look at that and go, right, now I understand what this is. It's got some reasonable descriptions in it. It's got some sample data. It could obviously be taken to another level, but that worked very well. And it also meant the teams could kind of work independently of each other. So I don't think all is lost, but I think we need to really, really somehow find the people in the organization that can buy into this. And you don't need to spend a fortune to do it. You could build it into your Scrum cycles and just call it a refactoring Scrum. For this sprint, we're just going to work on refactoring and paying off technical debt. That's it. And we're going to do it once. We could do it one every six sprints. If there's nothing much going on because we're waiting for other teams, let's do another sprint of refactoring. And build that into the corporate culture, because I think we were talking about this in another podcast where people are so busy, as you say, feature factoring, is that they end up dying a death. The product basically goes like this. I think it's in one of your diagrams somewhere. It's one of your many diagrams, Rich, where you basically die a death because of the weight, because you're not paying off the technical debt as you're going. You're not paying off. You're not refactoring these things. You're not saying, well, this is becoming too heavy. Let's put it back into an API. Let's put it back into a central service.
I was going to say one of the interesting dynamics. I think Scrum teams working in 2-week sprints. The interface out to other systems are microservices. All right, then you get into the people in the process, right? And so you find out that they're doing their testing within 2-week sprints, within the sprint, brilliant, and then they chuck it over the fence to this big integration exercise. And you go to the team and you say, okay, so you're working in microservices. This is back to Hugh's point around isolation. What did that integration team actually do in terms of the scope that they're achieving based on not duplicating what you did? Bearing in mind that you've done microservices and you've got isolation there already, right? Your whole aim is to get loose coupling. Oh, we don't know what they did. Hang on a minute. There is something wrong here, right? In that you have got architectural principles going through design principles, going through build principles, going through test principles that should all be talking about loose coupling, which says this is the point to which we know there is no change. But yet you chuck it over the fence to this massive end-to-end exercise that is endless, that kind of breaks this whole momentum that you're going with. So, I think there is an emphasis on, individual teams to make sure that those boundaries are discussed very early doors up front. And, we're not talking about, to Hugh's point, a large amount of work. Get your architecture diagram out and start drawing some dotted lines around the boundaries. It takes half an hour. And then whether you can actually implement those things or not is another question, right? Because, I think there is a big confidence game in terms of whether you really understand your isolation or not. And so run those two things in parallel, right? Create some tests that just do the isolation, i.e. the API-based test, and run your end-to-end test in parallel. Understand whether you actually found some defects in end-to-end that you didn't find in your integration test. You probably won't, because there's a hell of a lot of duplication and wasted effort in that end-to-end thing. And when you don't find those defects, then with your stakeholders, agree that you'll remove those things, because they are a waste of time, a waste of money, and they'll be happy, right? Because they're finding these things far, far quicker in those integration tests, and they're saving a hell of a lot of money in not having to go through this burden of big end-to-end. There's a really easy thing to do, and is it technical? No, it's more hearts and minds than it is actually technical implementation on that front.
Yeah, but you mentioned about those large chain testing. That's also some things. The other one is test data, because of which one is the right test data. So we also face sometimes issues with that kind of stuff. So if you got more isolated, we are all going to containers, of course, and small things. We're doing more and more like that in the modern parts. We should in COBOL a little bit less now, but in the Java stack, and we got a Microsoft stack, there we're using more and more containers, and they have their own data. That's okay, that's doing. But if you're going to next step to chain testing or integration testing, then we have spend a lot of time getting up our chain test environments in the right way. Yeah.
Any final thoughts, Marcel? I think that's probably been an interesting chit chat today.
No, I think you helped me out again by I'm started only in this year, Jan, and I'm looking to sell it. Looking for the right persons internally, the right sponsor, and as you said, you only need one person who believes. That's what I'm trying to do now. Getting. Selling it internals, looking for the right people, looking like partners like you or other partners, give demos. What we're doing is twice a year we have our internal seminars. We're trying to get people enthusiastic. So what I'm now trying to do is get the fire burning somewhere, and hope sometimes the spark will get over. I think that's the best thing I can do now. And I think you're also saying that's the best thing for now. I think that's what I learned now. So I'm glad I'm on the right way, I think.
Yeah, good. I think so. And I mean, the best way to persuade people is just to say this is what other companies have done. You've saved a fortune, and their job's more interesting now. There's a lot of people just like coming to work and having friends and all that kind of stuff. But actually, you can't do that in a competitive world, or you can't do that where you're continually not delivering. So things do need to change. Change is good. All right, Marcel, good to chat with you. I think we've lost Rich now. So I will see you somewhere in a coffee shop somewhere in Utrecht, hopefully soon.
I think so.
Thanks for listening to this episode of the Why Didn't You Test That podcast. To continue the conversation, head over to curiositysoftware.ie. Subscribe for more episodes.